US allies in the Middle East have become disillusioned with Donald Trump's policies and are considering the option of shutting down American military bases on their territory. The Washington Post, citing Arab and Western officials, reports: the governments of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Kuwait and Bahrain are dissatisfied with Trump because of his inability to achieve an end to the war with Iran. And some of these countries are already discussing whether it still makes sense to host American military bases on their territory. They say that because of the presence of these bases, they are being targeted by Iran, while Trump still can't end this war. One Arab official put it very bluntly, quote, "Trump started this war and we are paying for it. And this irritation is compounded by two other facts. First, Trump's war itself has critically undermined the world's stockpiles of air defense missiles. And second, Trump's list of objectives in this war, after 6 months of fighting, has shrunk dramatically to just hoping to open the Hormuz Strait and stabilize oil prices. All the other goals of this war that were announced at the beginning have been pushed to the background, to the second, third, or even fifth priority. And everything that worried the allies, the nuclear program, Iran's proxy forces, missiles and so on, all of that remains unresolved. And now the allies in the Persian Gulf are asking themselves a question. Do we really need to keep American military bases on our territory? Or should we remove them and, as they say, stay out of this conflict? So, let's discuss this topic. I'll share some insider information and we'll dive deep into it. My name is Alexei Peci. Before we begin, I ask you to subscribe to the channel. We're moving towards the 300,000 subscriber mark, so I'll be grateful for each of your subscriptions. So, let's start with the biggest news of the day. According to the Washington Post, the Gulf countries have openly expressed their dissatisfaction with Donald Trump's policy in the Middle East region. The dissatisfaction has reached its highest level since the US and Israel attacked Iran on February 28. In recent weeks, Trump has repeatedly threatened Iran with some kind of super powerful strikes, but then walked back those threats, citing progress in negotiations, which ultimately led to absolutely nothing. Meanwhile, the Gulf countries continue to suffer from real attacks. First and foremost, Saudi Arabia, which is being hit not only by Iran itself, but also by the Yemeni Houthis and Iraqi militias supported by Iran. Let me also remind you that the Houthis are trying to block the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And after Iran blocked the Hormuz Strait in the first days of the war, Saudi Arabia became heavily dependent on its oil export ports in the Red Sea. In other words, it found itself under threat from two key directions at once. It's telling how the position of the allies themselves changed. According to sources from the publication, Oman was against the war from the very beginning. But Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain changed their position from time to time and sometimes supported the war. A Western diplomat explained the logic of the initial period of the war like this. In Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, they believed that a quick and decisive victory could be quite beneficial for them. But the situation began to change before the first round of negotiations between Iran and the US in April, because by then it had already become clear that the Iranian regime would not only not fall, but also would not open the Hormuz Strait. And now this disappointment is turning into a specific practical result. After April, some countries began to explore alternative options for military cooperation. The result was a mutual defense agreement, which was signed last week by Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Pakistan, the very pact that we have already discussed on this YouTube channel. A high-ranking European official called this agreement a direct signal to the United States. He said that three influential Sunni states are trying to diversify their military partnerships. An official who is in regular contact with the top leaders of the Persian Gulf countries said that in their view, the United States is no longer sufficient to ensure security. Therefore, they need to look for some alternatives. And I would like to remind you that for decades, the United States was considered the guarantor of security in the region. At the same time, a Western diplomat in the region clarified an important detail. We shouldn't exaggerate the scale of the rift either. That is, it's important not to go to extremes. These changes do not mean a fundamental reassessment of the Arab states' relationship with Washington as a whole. Even before the war with Iran, according to this Western diplomat, American forces in the region did not meet with much enthusiasm. The US presence was more of a necessary evil. Now, why Washington may simply be unable to be relied on or fix the situation, even if it really wants to. According to the Telegraph, the US has been a leader in air defense system production for decades, but against the backdrop of the war in the Middle East, even their stockpiles have started to run low. American Patriot and CAAD systems proved effective against Iranian ballistic missiles, but the ammunition stockpiled over many years was used up in just a few months. Here are the specific numbers. During this war, according to the Telegraph, the US used up about 2/3 of its stockpiled Patriot missiles and 40% of all CAAD missile reserves. Currently, Washington, I should note, is able to produce about 650 interceptors for the Patriot system and only 96 missiles for the CAAD system annually. And here is a key detail specifically for the Allies. Right now, 19 countries in the world use Patriot air defense systems, and almost all of them depend on supplies from the US. Therefore, any shortage in the States essentially becomes a global shortage. Japan already has a license to produce Patriot missiles. Germany, as you know, is building a factory, but their capabilities are significantly lower than Washington's. At the same time, Russia, Iran, China and North Korea are ramping up the production of ballistic missiles. According to official data, China already has 3,000 ballistic missiles in its stockpiles, and Russia produces about 100 to 120 per month. On average, it takes 2 interceptor missiles to intercept 1 ballistic missile. So the math of the shortage is even worse than it seems at first glance. And it's telling that the shortage of interceptor missiles has already directly affected the countries of the Persian Gulf. These are the very allies whose disappointment is being reported by the Washington Post. According to the publication, they are placing very large orders to replenish their air defense stockpiles. So Washington is not just losing the trust of its allies politically, it physically cannot provide them with the weapons that would make the American military presence more valuable in their eyes. And the third and final point of this story is how during this war, Donald Trump's own goals in this conflict have been shrinking. Let me remind you, initially Donald Trump's administration set absolute goals. That was the complete capitulation of Iran and regime change in Iran. That was a guarantee that Iran would never obtain nuclear weapons. That was a guarantee that the missile program and the drone program would at least be stopped. And importantly, Tehran should stop supporting all proxy forces in the region, like Hezbollah or the Houthis in Yemen. Those were the ambitious goals. But in an interview with Fox News on August 14th, Vice President J.D. Vance was asked what could be the outcome of the war, and he named only 2 goals. He said that we have 2 key goals, and he named these goals in a very telling order. Here is the quote. The first goal is to ensure that the Gulf countries continue to supply oil and gas to the world economy so that we have stable energy prices. This is goal number 1, to keep oil and gas prices low for Americans. And the second point, Vance says, is to ensure that Iran never obtains nuclear weapons. Pay attention to the sequence itself. The stability of oil prices is now more important for Americans than the denuclearization of Iran, which until recently was considered the absolute number 1 priority. In other words, the very war for which Trump initially demanded Tehran's unconditional surrender has, after 6 months, officially been reduced to the task of preventing gasoline prices from rising in the US. Meanwhile, the Gulf allies continue to suffer real attacks and endure real economic damage as a result of this war. So what do we have in the end? The US allies in the Persian Gulf are not disappointed in the abstract. No, they directly link their frustration to Donald Trump's inability to finish the war, even though they are the ones paying for it. With the Houthis' attacks, the blocked Hormuz Strait, dependence on vulnerable Red Sea ports, and so on. In response, they have already started building military alternatives to the US. For example, Saudi Arabia's pact with Turkey and Pakistan, and Washington's ability to maintain their trust through military force is physically limited. Let me remind you, 2/3 of the Patriot stockpiles and 40 THAADs have already been used up in this war, because of which all these allies have suffered. And against this backdrop, Trump himself, through his vice president, is essentially admitting that the ambitious goals of the war have been abandoned in favor of a much more modest objective, simply not letting Americans pay more for gasoline. That's it, it all came down to this. Let me remind you, this problem didn't even exist before the war, and now I'm curious to see how Trump will get out of this situation. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye everyone.